Ukraine's Azov Corps just flew drones over Mariupol, a city Russia has occupied for 4 years, and the footage they released isn't just symbolic. It is the opening frame of something much larger. And if you understand what's actually happening on this front right now, you realize Russia's entire summer campaign is already bleeding out before it begins. Today is June 1st, 2026. Mark the date, because what's unfolding in eastern Ukraine this week is the kind of strategic inflection point that looks, in the moment, like a single striking video. And only later do people realize they were watching a war change direction in real time. This is Professor David. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of these shifts. And here's what's actually going on. Ukraine's first Azov Corps released footage on May 8th, showing reconnaissance and strike drone systems flying over Mariupol, a city that has been under Russian occupation since May 2022. The statement from Azov read, "The Corps is already patrolling its hometown, for now, from the air, but more is coming." That line alone should have set off alarm bells in every Russian logistics planning room from Donetsk to Rostov. Because here's what it actually means. Azov's drones are now patrolling roads up to 160 kilometers behind the front line. That's not a raid, that's a persistent presence. That's control of airspace over supply corridors that Russia assumed were safely in its rear. And the deeper you go into what's actually happening here, the more you understand why the Kremlin has a problem it cannot easily solve. Let's go back one step. Russia spent months assembling the forces for what military analysts were calling the defining push of the war. The Institute for the Study of War confirmed in March that Russian forces had likely begun their anticipated spring-summer 2026 offensive against Ukraine's Fortress Belt, a 50-kilometer chain of fortified cities running from Sloviansk through Kramatorsk to Druzhkivka and Kostyantynivka, reinforced since 2014 and described as the backbone of Ukraine's defense in Donetsk Oblast, whose fall would open direct routes west toward Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia. That's the prize Russia has been working toward for 2 years. Seizing those cities would give Putin his most strategically meaningful territorial gain since the early months of the invasion. And the Russian General Staff knew that, and positioned accordingly. ISW reported that Russian troops increased mechanized assaults along the front in late March, with the uptick beginning on March 17th, when Russian forces deployed heavy equipment and company-sized units in multiple sectors simultaneously: Novopavlivka, Kupiansk, Hryshine, and near Liman. This was the shaping phase, probing, pressuring, forcing Ukrainian units to reveal defensive positions before the main hammer fell. Standard doctrine. The kind of preparation that, on paper, should have preceded a breakthrough. Except something went wrong. Or rather, something went right for Ukraine. ISW noted that in one assault alone, Russian forces suffered 405 casualties from over 500 personnel involved, a rate ISW described as unsustainable and likely to degrade Russia's ability to maintain such large assaults in the medium to long term. 405 casualties in a single engagement, out of 500 men. Think about what that means for unit cohesion, for morale, for the commanders who have to send the next wave. And this was just one documented operation. This was happening across multiple sectors, multiple days. The question is why? Why are Russian casualty rates spiking so dramatically at the exact moment they're supposed to be mounting their biggest offensive? The answer is drones. But not the way most people think about drones. According to analysis from Euromaidan Press, drones drove some 96% of Russia's March casualties. Not artillery, not airstrikes, not infantry contact. Drones. 96%. And that number reflects something that has fundamentally shifted in how this war is being fought. Because the old model was, Ukrainian drones intercept Russian infantry as it advances toward Ukrainian positions. FPV drones, short range, maximum 20 kilometers from the front, hunting assault squads in fields and tree lines. That model still exists. But there is now a second model running simultaneously, and it is far more disruptive. Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced that Ukraine has quadrupled the destruction of Russian logistics, warehouses, equipment, command posts, and supply routes deep behind front lines over the past several months, and that a clear pattern is visible in the data. The more Russian logistics are destroyed, the fewer assault operations take place along the line of combat. Quadrupled. Not increased, not improved, quadrupled. And the minister isn't speculating. He's describing what his own military's dashboards are showing in real time. Then on May 27th, Fedorov formalized the strategy. Ukraine announced a program called Logistical Lockdown, with the stated goal of increasing pressure on Russian rear areas and preventing Russia from conducting active assault operations by systematically targeting logistics deeper behind the lines of contact. The first phase channels the equivalent of $113 million directly to the drone brigades hitting Russian logistics, depots, equipment, command posts, and supply routes at operational depth. This is not an improvised battlefield tactic. This is a formally funded, doctrine-level strategic program. Ukraine looked at what was working, named it, budgeted it, and is now scaling it nationally. And the numbers behind this decision are stark. Fedorov said that while in October Russia lost 67 soldiers per square kilometer of advance, by April 2026, that number had risen to 179. Russia is now suffering over 35,000 soldiers killed or seriously wounded every single month. 179 soldiers per square kilometer. That is the cost of advancing 1 kilometer on average across the front. The math is brutal. Russia is paying in human lives at a rate that would have seemed unthinkable even 2 years ago. And it is paying it not at Ukrainian defensive lines. It is paying it in supply columns, fuel convoys, ammunition trucks, and command vehicles that are being picked off dozens of kilometers behind where the fighting is supposed to be happening. Here's what makes this so hard for Russia to counter. The logistics lockdown strategy targets the nerve system of an army, not the fist. You can reinforce a frontline position. You can replace soldiers who fall in an assault. It's wasteful, it's brutal, but Russia has shown it is willing to absorb those costs. What's much harder to replace is the logistical infrastructure that makes an assault possible in the first place. Fuel tankers, ammunition shipments, command and communications nodes, the trucks carrying rations and medical supplies that keep a 100,000-man formation functional. Ukrainian military intelligence drone operators have established fire control over sections of the highway linking the temporarily occupied cities of Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Jankoy, targeting Russian military trucks carrying troops, ammunition, and supplies, as well as fuel tankers and mobile fire teams. Fire control. That phrase means something specific. It means Ukrainian drones are not merely occasionally striking targets along that highway. It means any Russian vehicle moving along that corridor is operating under the presumption it can be struck. That changes behavior. Convoys slow down or stop. Drivers take longer routes. Schedules become unpredictable. Supply reliability collapses. Not because every truck is destroyed, but because every driver knows they might be next. Ukrainian drones are flying more than 150 kilometers deep behind the front lines and striking logistics vehicles near occupied checkpoints in the Donetsk region. Several Russian trucks were destroyed on the Rostov-Mariupol highway, blocking the road and preventing the movement of both military equipment and other vehicles. One blocked highway is a tactical inconvenience. A highway that gets blocked repeatedly, unpredictably, day and night, because an army of low-cost drones is hunting everything that moves on it. That is a strategic stranglehold. And this is where the Azov story connects to something much bigger. The Azov Corps statement confirmed their drones are patrolling roads up to 160 kilometers behind the front, announcing what they called a return to Mariupol. Mariupol is a logistics hub. It's a port city. It sits on the land corridor between mainland Russia and occupied Crimea. Russia has been using it as a throughput point for supplies, reinforcements, and materiel heading north toward Donetsk. Now, Ukrainian drones are overhead. Now Azov, the very unit that made its last stand in the Azovstal steel plant in 2022, the unit whose fighters were captured and some of whom are still in Russian captivity, is back over that city, documenting what Russia is moving and when, setting conditions for strikes. The symbolism is intense. The military significance is more so. OSINT analysts noted that in the first Azov Corps sector, the casualty ratio temporarily improved to as high as 1 to 20, meaning for every Ukrainian casualty, 20 Russians were taken out of the fight. 1 to 20. Let that settle. That is not the ratio of a force absorbing an offensive. That is the ratio of a force that has fundamentally changed how it fights. Azov's battalion commander Lev Pashko, whose call sign is Horus, put it directly. Those that adapt faster to changing battlefield dynamics will prevail. Adaptation. That is the word. Russia is still planning a conventional grinding offensive. Ukraine has adapted around it. In the Pokrovsk sector, the 12th Azov Brigade's Unmanned Systems Battalion is holding a 12 to 13-kilometer defensive line, and despite 42 documented Russian assault attempts in a single day on April 19th, none succeeded in breaching Ukrainian positions. 42 assault attempts in one day, 0 breakthroughs. The drones did what minefields and concrete and artillery used to do: stop the advance cold, without requiring Ukrainian soldiers to expose themselves to the same danger at the same proximity. This is the new geometry of defense. Now step back and think about what's happening from Moscow's perspective. Russia assembled its forces for a campaign it has been planning for months. The fortress belt, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, the chain of cities that anchors Ukraine's eastern defense, has been the strategic objective. Seizing it would be Putin's clearest military victory since the war began. The forces are in place. The mechanized units have been probing. The artillery has been ranging. And yet, ISW found that Russia advanced by a net 104 square kilometers between January 1st and May 26, 2026, compared to 1,619 square kilometers seized during the same period the previous year. 104 versus 1,600. Russia's rate of territorial advance has collapsed by over 90%. The offensive that was supposed to be decisive has, at least so far, been grinding itself down against a defense that is no longer primarily fighting at the front. Meanwhile, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency confirmed in a report to Congress that Ukraine retook approximately 400 square kilometers in and around Dnipropetrovsk, more territory than at any time since late 2022. Ukraine is recapturing ground. In the same period, Russia is supposed to be surging. And Ukraine is doing it not through mass mobilization, not through NATO tanks and infantry, but through drones hunting logistics 200 kilometers from the front, making Russian positions untenable before a single Ukrainian soldier has to cross open ground. Dmytro Putiata, a Ukrainian drone operator and analyst, wrote that in some directions, Ukrainian units are potentially setting the conditions for future tactical offensive operations by disrupting Russian logistics and targeting drone crews, and that this could lead to additional offensive operations before the end of spring. Setting conditions. That's a phrase that sounds bureaucratic until you understand what it means in practice. It means Ukrainian drone strikes are not just killing vehicles and soldiers in isolation. They are systematically removing the preconditions for Russian operations: the fuel, the ammunition, the communications, the mobility, until the Russian assault force is present but paralyzed. A 100,000-man formation without reliable fuel doesn't advance. Without reliable ammunition, it doesn't suppress. Without communications, it can't coordinate. The fist is still clenched, it just can't reach. On May 31st, Ukraine's 3rd Army Corps declared what it called an operation putting Russian supply lines across occupied Luhansk Oblast under the fire of its strike drones, with footage showing drone flights over occupied Luhansk and strikes on Russian armored vehicles across the region. Luhansk. This is territory Russia has held since 2014, and Ukrainian drones are now flying over it unopposed, operating up to 205 kilometers from the front line. The kill zone is expanding. The rear is no longer safe. And the Russian military blogger Alexander Karchenko, whose commentary often reflects the anxieties of the Russian defense community, apparently wrote in response to Ukraine's drone campaign, "The enemy mobilized its modest resources, switched to drone technology, and is striving toward a robot war. And when it's a robot war, we'll have to trade a living human for a flying machine." That is a Russian pro-war commentator admitting in so many words that Ukraine has found an asymmetry Russia doesn't have a clean answer to. On May 28th, drones operated by Ukrainian military intelligence temporarily blocked the R280 highway completely, with footage showing multiple Russian military fuel tankers burning after being struck, forcing traffic into long detours. A highway. Blocked. Not by mines, not by a ground assault, by drones striking vehicles until the burning wreckage physically stopped other vehicles from passing. That is a new kind of power projection, and it is being exercised over Russia's most critical supply arteries. Russia has responded by closing the M14 highway, the Rostov-on-Don to occupied Crimea road, to civilian traffic. Think about what that means. Russia is not just rerouting military convoys, it is conceding that an entire major highway is no longer safe for civilian movement. That is a country losing control of its own occupied rear. It is the kind of thing that starts to degrade not just military logistics, but the economic and administrative function of occupation. The more Russia's logistics corridors become kill zones, the more the entire architecture of occupation starts to strain. Here is the underlying logic that all of this is pointing to. Wars of attrition, and this has been called an attrition war since 2022, have always ultimately been decided not by bravery at the front, but by industrial capacity and logistical endurance. The side that can keep its forces supplied, fueled, and coordinated longer than the other will eventually grind the other down. Russia's bet has always been that it has more of everything: more men, more shells, more time, more willingness to absorb loss. The logistics lockdown strategy is Ukraine's answer to that calculation. If you can't match Russia's numbers, attack the system that makes Russia's numbers effective, not the soldier at the front, the truck that feeds him, the tanker that fuels his vehicle, the command post that tells him where to advance. Kill those, and a 100,000-man offensive becomes a 100,000-man logistical crisis. Ukrainian commanders describe the situation in terms that suggest this isn't a temporary adjustment, but a fundamental doctrinal shift, one where electronic warfare adaptation, drone density, and rear area interdiction are being treated as the primary levers of battlefield outcome. The front line in this model is almost secondary. You win in the rear, you win in the supply chain, you win in the fuel depot 60 kilometers back from the contact line, where no one expected drones to reach 6 months ago. Russia still has real advantages. It has more industrial production. It is manufacturing drones and artillery shells at scale. It has manpower, coerced, poorly trained, but present. And its offensive intent has not disappeared. ISW was clear that Russian forces are unlikely to seize the fortress belt in 2026, but will likely make some tactical gains at high cost. Some gains are still possible. The war is not over. The fortress belt is not yet secure. But the direction of the momentum has changed. And that change is being driven by something that 18 months ago would have seemed like a marginal capability. Medium-range strike drones, produced domestically, funded at scale, hunting logistics day and night across a kill zone that now stretches from the contact line to the occupied south. The question that doesn't have a clean answer, and it's worth sitting with, is whether Russia can adapt faster than Ukraine can expand the kill zone. Because drone warfare is not a fixed equation. Russia has electronic warfare. Russia has its own drones. The frequency battles, the jamming, the counter-drone systems, the adaptation of routing and timing. This is a live arms race running in real time across every sector every day. Ukraine is winning it right now. That doesn't mean the advantage is permanent. What it does mean is that the summer of 2026 is not going to look like the summer of 2025, when Russia was taking 1,600 square kilometers and the fortress belt seemed genuinely threatened. The math has changed, the strategy has changed, and at least one side is adapting faster than the other. And maybe the most unsettling thought in all of this, not for Ukraine, but for every calculation being made in Moscow, is that Azov is flying drones over Mariupol, over the city where their fighters made their last stand 4 years ago, and their commander's message was, for now, from the air. More is coming. That's not a boast. That's a statement of intent, backed by a changing battlefield reality. The sky over occupied Ukraine is no longer Russia's. What does a military do when its rear is no longer safe? Its logistics are being hunted at scale. Its casualty cost per kilometer is approaching 3 times what it was a year ago, and it still hasn't found an answer. This is Professor David. I'll see you in the next one.